Hey YouTube, welcome back. If you're watching this video and you haven't seen the first part, recommend you go look at that. I'll try and remember to put a link down in the description. But here we are, we're going to do the main attraction, the teardown of the body of the classic Army Microgun. I've already kind of gone right into the guts of the motor assembly, the grip, and really there's not much in the gas reservoir bottle to examine. So let's get right into the nitty-gritty. What we've got here is the body of the Microgun. On the back end we've got two gas connectors. One feeds straight through to the barrel, the other is really just a connection to the gas inlet. You've got a large hex head, socket head cap screw, four threaded points on, I guess, the casting of the body of the Microgun where the handle screws in, and that's really it for the back. Pretty nondescript. Then you've got the handle, which I'll take off in a second, and the rest of this mechanism. First thing we're going to do is get this body off of the Microgun, and I believe you have to actually take apart the... That's not the right size. I believe you actually have to disassemble and remove the handle to get this apart. I honestly can't remember because I tore it down years ago and never really touched it since. So we're just gonna dig right into this. Alright. So if I remember correctly, alright, so this handle was cast with a little bit of spring to it. It actually clamps in on these two protruding parts of the plastic mold. I will note that they've gone to great effort to do this right. All of these threaded holes have heat set inserts. Alright, for those of you not familiar with heat set inserts, there are cheaper versions that look like this. You'll see, come on, focus. It may not want to focus. There it is. You'll see a cheaper style heat set insert with just some knurled pieces of brass. But the better heat set inserts actually have a... These are M3s, if I can get it to focus. The better heat set inserts actually have a bit of texture to them, where the I guess the ridges on this heat set insert are set at an angle, forcing any kind of pull force to also become a rotational force as well. Just looking here, it looks like they're using the cheaper style heat set inserts, but I've heard pretty much no examples of a failure of these inserts, namely because the forces are designed in such a way that they're really not going to rip these out. Oh, yeah, it really was just force. Oh, right. So there's this giant bearing right here. I can't see any stamping or marking on it, but functionally it's, how many millimeters is this? Let's get calipers. Functionally it's a 100 millimeter bearing. So presumably, this bearing costs quite a bit. Okay, let's just take a look at the outer housing. There's a press fit with a slight taper. You can't really see it on camera, but there is a slight taper to this portion from here down to here, where that bearing sits. So it's literally just a press fit. And to remove it, all I really did was I put my thumbs here and my index fingers behind it to just give it a bit of a push. Well, now that I've done that, I can't actually demo it on camera. Might just have to give it a little bit of a tap while applying pressure. Yeah. So there's not much to the plastic housing, and now we're really getting into the guts of this thing, and it doesn't want to stay still. Okay, let's try and remember how to separate this assembly. I'm pretty sure it has to do with this hex bolt in the back. Also, you can see the dark coloration to the grease. That means that there's metal wear. I'm pretty sure that it's that hex bolt, so let's just try that. We're gonna YOLO this. Oh, okay, that worked actually quite easily. Just gonna back that thread off, and then a bunch of guts are gonna probably want to come spilling out. Because this is spring-loaded, I believe. Oh, no it isn't. Alright, so what do we have here? We've got a large sealing surface here and here. And it looks like that bolt goes all the way through. And I think it stops at a dead end. So there might not actually be much to this compartment. But you can kind of see what's going on here. This is top dead center, and that's in line with the barrel. When you apply compressed gas to here, it fills up this reservoir and exits through this port. This port goes to the valve in the trigger, comes back to here through to the barrel. So maybe this is just intended as like a small pressure stabilizing gas chamber. I don't think it has anything to do with this. You're gonna have to look somewhere else to disassemble this. We might just have to go through the top here. There are some recessed holes for a Allen key to get in. No, that's a little too small. Say 3mm. We're going to give this a little bit more mechanical support. Can I get this to perfect? Gaffer tape to the rescue, am I right? Always the gaffer tape. Alright, let's undo the bolts. I'm not even going to bother with like a star pattern or anything. We're just going to full send this. They want to come loose, I just can't. Oh, there it is. Alright, so what do we have here? We do have a couple BBs stuck in the hop-ups. Just going to go ahead and push those out. Let's start with the loading and feeding mechanism. So this is oriented upright. The gas fittings on the bottom. This is where the gas would enter, and you'll notice that at the 3, 9, and 12 positions, sorry, 3, 9, 6, and 12, if you were to treat this like a clock, the 3, 6, 9, and 12, I can count, I swear, positions all have this tube. And you'll notice this blue nozzle. So what does this actually do? Let's see what's happening. When this rotates in this direction, the BBs will sit in this chamber. You'll also notice that there is literally an Allen key just jammed in there somehow as a agitator or paddle to make sure that the BBs make it into these tracks. So as it spins around, the BB will find its way into that position, And then as it rotates around, you'll notice that the nozzle goes from a low position to a raised position. And you'll see here it's starting to get lifted up. When it's getting lifted up, it would actually be pushed into the hop-up rubber of these nozzles. Actually, let's get rid of that last BB. So fundamentally, you just have 4 loading nozzles, 4 feed paths for BBs, and every time it rotates, it lifts that up. I do remember this mechanism being a complete chore to disassemble and reassemble, but we're going to get into this for science. Let's just put the barrel aside. And we're back. Alright, so now the hard part, getting to the delicious guts of the inside of this. Let us try, and that is torqued on pretty good there. We're going to have to use the impact again. Alright, so when I went into this a couple years ago, I remember it was spring-loaded to a degree. So we're just going to, step 1, remove the hex bolt holding this whole assembly together. Step 2, oh, there are all the parts exploding. Okay, so what do we got? We have springs and pistons and parts. So you'll notice that there is a recessed track here with a ramp on one side and a ramp on the other. And actually I should use a softer tool. Okay, so we've got a recessed track here with a ramp on one side and a shorter ramp on the other. You've got a blue plastic, what looks like Delrin surface here that is a straight shot through to the air fitting on the opposite side. Right, this just goes straight through to the other side. And on this surface, you have 4 sliding pistons that are spring preloaded behind them. And pretty beefy springs too. These pistons slide up and down inside this larger bore tube with an O-ring that actually seals onto the piston. So that means that any air from this side doesn't get to leak around to this side of the piston, nor will it get to leak around to that side. They sit in O-ring inwards, which means they are imposed this way on the surface. So let's just mock that up, and you'll start to see how this works. When one of the nozzles is at top dead center, the compressed air can flow straight through. So as it ramps up here, it's pushing the BB into the hop-up rubber, and these will rotate around. So let's rotate this down. And as this rotates up, it's loading the BB into the chamber. Now it's not going to sit in an angle because these tubes hold it perpendicular to the flat surface here. So it gets ramped up, and then you'll notice there was always a little click. There was a slight click, and it jumps up onto this Delrin surface. I don't know if there's a slight spring preload in there. We can always go back there in a second. Anyways, when this jumps from here over to here, it opens up the air path. Ordinarily, the only thing touching this blue plastic is this black surface over here, meaning that there's minimal air leakage, but there's still an air leakage path because the air is just going to form a little air cushion between the blue plastic and the black plastic here. So they're going to hover and separate slightly until one of these nozzles rotates into position. So the second this rotates into position, air passes through, shoots the BB out, And because these are constantly rotating, this will move out of the way, this will move up, open up a new BB pathway, shoot that BB, and then the whole process kind of continues. I wish I could 3D print a clear version of this that was transparent. A couple other things that are kind of interesting and evident. In terms of wear parts, this, what seems like either cast aluminum or zinc, probably zinc. I guess it's machined in such a way that the feed path here is gentle to minimize the chance of a chopped BB, but on the exit pathway, it's relatively sharp to what's the best way to put it? I guess to balance out the forces of loading a BB, because you'll notice as these two, oh, I can't actually show it. Alright, so let's rotate this around 90 degrees. Remember, these are always superimposed 90 degrees to each other, right? So we're just going to delete these two pieces and just focus on these. As this is sliding out of the way, the new BB is getting fed in, and then as we get to the exit ramp and we start sliding down, we start sliding up. By the time it's completely exited, we are still not fully in the up position for the new BB. And by the time we're completely flat and level from the one exiting, we are now in the firing position for the new BB. I guess what I'm trying to get at is the spring force loading the BB is kind of counterbalanced by the spring force of this returning to the open position for BBs to be fed and for this piston to slide all the way around. Okay, so let's take a look at what's behind this blue Delrin on this side, and then we will take a look at this side. Taking care that replacement parts are basically non-existent because Classic Army never intended you to disassemble this. This will be interesting. I've also got to be a little careful because there's a wear pattern in here. If I hold the camera just right, you can see how there's curved score marks in this Delrin. I want to make sure I get the rotation correct when I replace it. Now, can I just lift with the hook? No, maybe not. Wish I had a dental hook. Let's try something with a bit more ridged texture. Alright, there we go. So, this mating piston is just a straight up piece of Delrin, just machined on a lathe, so a replacement could conceivably be made if you had the dimensions of the intact part. So I might actually record some of the dimensions before I reassemble this for posterity. And then in the back we've just got a straight up silicone O-ring. So this piston just plops right in here and mates with that O-ring, and probably just shoulders right here. So there's a slight spring preloading from this O-ring that when you torque down this assembly, let's get rid of those springs, when this assembly is mated down here, the O-ring will get compressed a little bit more, and it will force this piston against this Delrin surface here. And it's very slippery. You can see even with a little bit of grease, it just glides right along. So, pretty well designed mechanism, considering that all is really happening is rotation. The rotation of this mechanism not only loads the BBs, but brings them into the firing position at top dead center, and then reopens the feeding path. Now, that's not all there is to it. But we've pretty much explored everything in this segment, so let's go over to this guy. Alright, so inside the center you've got this bearing. there is actually a little bit of corrosion going on here, which is interesting. I'm almost wondering if this corrosion is... No? Maybe it's related to the bolt? No. Maybe it's just some miscellaneous crap. There is keying, you'll notice. There's a little notch there, and a corresponding protrusion that's proud of the casting. And those just help the part align, because they want to make sure that this, which is literally just an Allen key, lines up correctly and is at the 6 o'clock position. There's a foam ring here, which I don't know if I can get out easily without tearing it, but we'll try. Presumably this foam ring... No, it's going to tear. Presumably this foam ring is intended just to help dampen the rattling sound of BBs. And actually, speaking of the foam, where did the other part of foam go? Oh, it's underneath this. Okay. So that's really all there is to this side. Now, you'll remember there were 4 pistons in here that lifted up to... there were 4 pistons that raised up to actually load the BBs. I'll show you one of those now. There's another spring preloading that. So let's just push one of these pistons out. And I'm going to want to keep them kind of generally paired together to avoid any mismatches. Just because each of these pistons has been worn into each of these bores, and I don't want to change them or mix them up. So another Delrin wear part. I can't remember if this is stock silicone grease or whether I added some after the fact, but it's pretty well lubricated, so these parts really aren't going to wear out, barring a nozzle getting chopped or something. That's really all there is to this mechanism. It's literally just like the nozzle on your version 2 gearbox. It lifts up into a position to feed a BB into the hop-up. So let's demonstrate with the barrel assembly here. Knowing that the casting lifts and lowers the lower piston, the lower piston then interacts with a spring, which then interacts with the back of this piston and the spring in the bottom of this bore. Eventually, this nozzle, if I can get it to focus on this part of the frame, this nozzle will feed in to this hop-up rubber like that. I guess is the best way to describe it. Form an air seal that's fleeting, only when it passes top dead center, and then fire the BB. When it clears top dead center, the nozzle retracts, allowing another BB to be fed into this pathway on the another BB to be fed into this pathway, these 4 channels, and repeat the cycle every quarter rotation of this barrel. I guess the only other curiosity I have is, are the springs the same? The answer is no. The springs are not the same. They are different spring tensions, so clearly a fair amount of thought's been put into the mechanism here. I think what I'm going to do next is reassemble this. I guess the best way to describe it is, I don't know if I care to actually measure these parts. Also, I guess the hard part is reassembling this, because you have to align the nozzle to the neighboring, what's the best way to put it? The neighboring geometry. Basically, the nozzle needs to be perfectly lined up in order to protrude from here. So, yeah, there we go. So I've got this piston in place. When it gets raised by the casting, it enters the firing position, ever so slightly proud, and it interfaces with this bit, firing the BB. And that spring fell out. Okay, lovely. Okay. Only other thing I think I can comment on at this stage is the design of this molded piece of plastic. I have long mused about modifying this, to have 6 barrels. Given the geometry here, it may be quite difficult. I'm probably going to take some reference photos before I reassemble everything. The long story short is, if you were to add 2 more mechanisms here and push these over, you end up with very little space for BBs to get loaded in. Perhaps they actually did experiment with a 6-barrel version of this, and they found that they couldn't get the BBs to reliably feed with 6 of them, so they settled for 4. Maybe. Maybe. Honestly, 6 barrels would simply run BBs through it faster. 2,000 BBs in this long magazine and reservoir on this side deplete in maybe 30 seconds to a minute tops when you hold down the trigger and go BERT. So 6 barrels would cut that time down by 33%. And clearly you're going to be buying BBs by the 50-pound bag and just dumping them into this thing. Reloading is obviously a bit of a pain. And that's another side project that I would like to address, but more on that later. Okay, so I'm going to leave this alone for the moment and comment on one last bit regarding this piece of plastic here. You'll notice that if this is the hop-up rubber, I'm going to try and get this to focus in the near field. Alright, move the camera. I think it's focusing properly. That's the hop-up adjustment screw. That's the hop-up rubber right here. You'll notice that the hop-up grub screw is actually supported on 2 separate sides by this plastic and by this body. You might be able to just make out the slight, I think they're M3 threads that have been cut into this plastic just by virtue of inserting these grub screws. These grub screws control the hop-up and, quite frankly, dictate whether or not you end up with your hop-up adjustment changed just by disassembling this. I'm kind of hesitant to remove these grub screws. If I do, I might only do it for 1, but we'll cross that bridge in a bit. Either way, that seems like a potential failure point in the future if you were to strip that out, or you were to wear out this hop-up rubber. You'd have to disassemble this entire mechanism. As far as I've gone, I mean, you don't have to disassemble this from the casting. You can leave that bit alone, but you'd have to disassemble this mechanism from that housing to gain access to the barrels and to gain access to that. So you're going to have to do quite a bit of disassembly. And I guess the only other thing that then bothers me is that these 4 holes are M4, but they are live threads. So they are just, I guess, forcefully tapped into plastic. If you over-torque one of those 4 bolts, one of these 4 very long bolts, those are 11 centimeters long. If you over-torque one of these into one of these holes, you're screwed. You're pretty screwed. No pun intended. Alright, and that's it for this video. I've managed to reassemble the feed and firing mechanism, so all that's really left is to look at the rotary barrel assembly with this chonky bearing, and just see how the rest of this is assembled. I do have some thoughts in this last video that I'll post sometime in the future as to how this could potentially be improved, different mod ideas, things that have been on my mind for a while. But otherwise, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Hit that notification bell. Tell the algorithm how to control your viewing habits. Otherwise, until next time, peace out.